The Qing Dynasty, China's last empire. Imagine a world of emperors, forbidden palaces, and dynasties that shaped history for centuries. The Qing Dynasty, 1644 to 1912, wasn't just any dynasty. It was China's last imperial rule, a period of great power, stunning culture, and ultimate downfall. The Qing weren't even originally Chinese. They were Manchus, a nomadic people from the northeast. In the 17th century, they stormed the Great Wall, took over Beijing, and overthrew the Ming Dynasty. What followed was a 268-year reign that saw massive territorial expansion, economic growth, and incredible cultural achievements. At its height, the Qing Empire stretched across China, Taiwan, Tibet, Mongolia, and parts of Central Asia. The economy was booming, trade was flourishing, and China's silk, porcelain, and tea were in high demand worldwide. It was during this time that Europe started desperately craving Chinese goods, leading to the famous Silk Road trade, and later, the Opium Wars, the Golden Age. The Qing Dynasty's peak came under emperors like Kangxi, Yongzheng, and Qianlong. They expanded the empire, crushed rebellions, and promoted art, literature, and Confucian values. The Forbidden City was at its most magnificent, and the empire seemed invincible. But behind the grandeur, problems were brewing. The population exploded, putting pressure on resources. Corruption spread like wildfire, and the Europeans weren't just trading anymore. They wanted control, the Opium Wars, and the beginning of the end. The British had a problem. They loved Chinese tea, but China didn't want anything Britain had to offer. Their solution? Opium. They smuggled it into China, got millions addicted, and when the Qing tried to stop the trade, Britain declared war. The Opium Wars, 1839 to 1842, 1856 to 1860, were a disaster for the Qing. Britain crushed China's outdated military, forced them to open trade ports, and took Hong Kong. This was the beginning of a humiliating era where foreign powers dominated China. Rebellions, foreign invasions, and total collapse. The 19th century was a nightmare. The Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864, a religious uprising, killed over 20 million people. Then came the Boxer Rebellion, 1899 to 1901, a desperate attempt to drive out foreigners. But instead of regaining power, the Qing became even weaker. By the early 1900s, China was no longer ruled by emperors, but by foreign influence and internal chaos. The final blow came in 1911, when revolutionaries led by Sun Yat-sen overthrew the Qing and ended over 2,000 years of imperial rule, the legacy of the Qing. Despite their fall, the Qing dynasty left behind an immense cultural and historical legacy. Their rule shaped modern China, and many of their political and territorial decisions still influence China today. From the opulence of the Forbidden City to the scars of the Opium Wars, the Qing dynasty remains one of history's most fascinating and dramatic empires. It was a story of conquest, glory, decline, and revolution. A story that ultimately changed the course of China forever. What if the Qing dynasty never fell? Would China have become a global superpower much earlier? Let's explore an alternate history where the Qing dynasty survived, and how it might have reshaped the world. A modernized Qing Empire? One of the biggest reasons the Qing dynasty collapsed was its failure to modernize. While Japan rapidly industrialized during the Meiji Restoration, 1868 to 1912, China was stuck in the past, relying on outdated weapons, an inefficient bureaucracy, and a crumbling economy. But what if the Qing rulers had embraced modernization instead of resisting it? Military reform. The Qing military was no match for European powers. If they had invested in Western-style warfare, like Japan did, China could have become Asia's dominant power much earlier. Industrialization. If the Qing had built railroads, factories, and a modern economy, China could have rivaled Britain and Germany by the early 1900s. Education and science. A shift from Confucian traditions to modern science and technology could have created a Chinese Renaissance, turning China into a global leader in innovation. If the Qing had modernized successfully, China might have avoided the humiliations of the Opium Wars, foreign invasions, and the Century of Humiliation. Instead of being carved up by Western powers, China could have become an empire as powerful as the British or Russian empires. No communist revolution, no People's Republic of China. The fall of the Qing led to decades of chaos, warlords, and civil war, which eventually gave rise to the Communist Party of China, CPC, and the People's Republic of China, PRC, in 1949. But in a world where the Qing never collapsed, there would be no communist revolution, meaning no Mao Zedong, no Great Leap Forward, no cultural revolution. Instead of a communist China, the country might have evolved into a constitutional monarchy, similar to Japan or Britain. No civil war, 1945 to 1949, between the nationalists and communists, meaning millions of lives saved. Would China still have become a global superpower? Maybe. But it might have been a very different China, one ruled by emperors, not party leaders. Would China have gone to war with Japan? One of the biggest turning points in modern history was the Second Sino-Japanese War, 1937 to 1945, which later merged into World War II. A weakened China struggled to resist Japan's brutal invasion, leading to some of the most horrific events of the 20th century, like the Nanjing Massacre. But if the Qing had never fallen, a stronger, modernized China could have stopped Japan's rise before it became a threat. The Pacific Front in World War II might have played out completely differently, with a Qing-controlled China fighting alongside or against Western powers. If China had crushed Japan early, the entire power balance in Asia and the world would be different today, a superpower before the US. By the 20th century, China had the largest population and a massive economy, but it was politically unstable. The Qing's collapse led to a century of turmoil before China finally rose as a superpower in the late 20th century. But if the Qing Dynasty had survived and modernized, China might have become a global superpower before the US and Soviet Union, had the world's most powerful navy and military by the 1930s, controlled trade routes across Asia, Africa, and Europe long before the modern Belt and Road Initiative. Instead of the 20th century being shaped by the US and USSR, it might have been shaped by a dominant Qing Empire, a different world order. A Qing dynasty that never fell could have completely changed global history. No communist China, possibly a monarchy or early democracy instead. No foreign domination. China might have resisted colonialism and kept its power. No century of humiliation. China would be one of the strongest nations in the world long before the 21st century. A different World War II outcome. Japan's invasion of China might have played out very differently. Would we still have the same modern China we see today? Maybe not. In some ways, the fall of the Qing led to the birth of the People's Republic of China, a country that despite its painful past, rose to become a global superpower. If the Qing had never fallen, China might have ruled the world far earlier or crumbled under its own weight. So, what do you think? Would a surviving Qing dynasty have been a golden age, or just another delay before the inevitable rise of a new China?